Hello, I'm Lexi, and this is what you should know. So, to go through a few things here, you may have noticed the change in my setup. I'm no longer releasing on Mondays. My own schedule became a little bit overloaded and I did overcommit just a skosh. So, I've adjusted accordingly. That being said, I will still be releasing weekly episodes. At this point, I don't see why I would not be, and we shall continue forward from here. Another thing you may notice a difference in the sound, that is because I am no longer recording in the closet. Last week I ended up on the floor trying to record and I ended up stuck on the floor for about 20 minutes because I lost feeling in my foot. So from now on I am going to be recording in the spare room. If there is a bit of an echo, I do apologise. I'm still trying to figure out how to get things set up appropriately for this. If there is no echo, never mind. But moving forward, a mystery has been solved. Not in full, of course, but someone has been caught. And that someone is going to be paying the price. This is what you should know about the murder of Lynette Dawson. Before there was a mystery, there was what we could only assume was love. Lynette Sims and Chris Dawson met at a high school function in 1965 when they were both just 16 years old. And from there, romance bloomed. They were together for 5 years when they married at St. Jude's Church. After they married, allegedly, Lynette had been struggling to conceive and was starting to look into adoption when she fell pregnant. She ended up having 2 beautiful daughters to call her own. Chris and his identical twin brother, Cole, started to play in professional rugby league for the Newton Jets between 1972 and 1976. And in 1975, the brothers and their spouses appeared in the ABC documentary program Checkerboard to discuss how the twins' close bond affected their lives. If you get a chance to, I do suggest watching it, as you do get a really good opportunity to see how they all acted. And you can just tell Lynn was so deeply in love, in a way that just doesn't waver. Unfortunately, these good times just could not last. After Chris and Paul's rugby careers ended, they found employment as physical education teachers, Chris working at Cromer High School near Sydney. During this time, Lynn had studied hard and found work as a nurse. And while working as a nurse, she would work just as hard to still be a doting wife and mother. And as she was so enamored by her husband, she refused to believe the disturbing rumours that began to swell. The rumours being that both Chris and Paul were regularly grooming and engaging in illicit sexual behaviour with female students at the school they worked for. In 1981, Chris groomed and slept with one of his students, Joanne Curtis, who was struggling with a toxic home life. She moved into the Dawson's family home at Chris's invitation. Joanne spent the next few years of her life moving between his home, Paul's home, and her mother's home. I know it's easy to get wrapped up and angry when considering there being another woman entering into a marriage. But there are a few things I really feel need to be said. Joanne was 16 when this started. She was being groomed, raped, manipulated, and abused. She would not have known better. And once you are in a cycle of abuse or an abusive relationship, it is damn hard to get out of it. So slut-shaming her for being a grooming victim is victim blaming. She was a child. Chris was the one that was completely at fault. And another thing is, if you are going to say it was how things were at the time, I have a simple question for you. Who are you defending? Because statutory rape carries a penalty of up to 14 years. It is a crime regardless of the decade. Oh, but Lexi, they ended up married and having a child together. Yes, that is the thing about abusive relationships. It takes a long time and a lot of effort to leave. Assuming you're lucky enough to leave alive, you would be horrified at what an abuser can achieve. But I shall get off my soapbox, I know. We all know Chris Dawson is a monster. In 1982, the Dawsons attended marriage counselling, and Lynette was feeling very positive about their future. However, it wasn't meant to be. And what exactly happened next is the real mystery, as I get the feeling that the elephant nutsack known as Chris will never have the actual balls to admit it or bring closure to those who miss Lynette. Allegedly, Chris drove Lynette to a bus stop so she could return clothes in Chatswood. Sometime after leaving, Chris allegedly received a phone call from his wife where she had told him that she needed some time away and was going to the Central Coast with friends. It was just 2 days after Lynette was last heard from that Joanne moved in, allegedly sleeping in the main bed with Chris, wearing Lynette's clothes, jewelry, and caring for their children. Lynette's family found it beyond strange that she would leave just like that and not take her children with her, or not try to contact any of her family. But Chris insisted that Lynette contacted him several times. In total, it would take Chris 6 weeks to report her as missing, all while continuing his abuse of Joanne. And in 1983, Chris sought legal advice to divorce Lynette for abandoning their marriage, and the divorce was finalized later that year. This would have been a power move for Chris, as he needed to not be married to gain complete control of Joanne. In the recent trial, Joanne expressed her distress about having to grow up immediately, rather than get the chance to live a normal teenage life that she so desperately wished to. And she was quoted as saying, "I was 18. I was taking care of 2 children, having to learn to cook, having to learn to clean, having to be the substitute housekeeper, sex slave, stepmother, babysitter, slave." She continued her testimony by elaborating on the nightmare that was her life as she eventually married Chris, and how on her wedding night in 1984, Chris grabbed her around the throat in an incident that she described as terrifying. This life riddled with domestic violence continued, with things only getting worse after their daughter was born in 1985. Amongst Joanne's testimony of the trauma she endured, she also revealed that towards the end of 1981, Chris had tried to hire a hitman to kill his wife Lynette. Chris's involvement became more clear during the divorce proceedings 9 years after Joanne and Chris had married. After being accused of lying to be malicious and destroy Chris, Joanne simply replied, "I'm not going to destroy him. He will destroy himself for what he's done to people, to me, to Lynn. I'm telling the truth." This isn't even the first time I have seen something like this said by Joanne. I've heard on one podcast where they stated that she had allegedly told a friend that she needed to leave Chris before he killed her the way that he killed Lynette. One strange detail of this case, which is just so small but made me just feel so off, was that after divorcing Lynette, he had her wedding ring reset for Joanne. You cannot tell me that this is not suspicious. Heck, you can't even tell me it's not gross. Who resets the ring they gave their first spouse to give to their second? Creeps. That's who. Well, I mean, I suppose also those who, have a family heirloom ring, but that's usually an engagement ring. Now, I am aware I'm not really following the timeline verbatim, but this is because, as the title states, this mystery has been solved. And to be honest, this is just how my brain jumps around, so strap in. In 1982, the search for Lynette was called off because there was alleged sightings of her alive and well. Former police detective sergeant Paul Mager came forward during the trial stating that he was told that unless they could find evidence to disprove that Lynette had not been seen, then there was nothing that could be done. Which to me is just insanity. The police should be able to talk to the alleged missing person before calling off the search. Because yes, there are people who want to disappear, and they will do so to avoid negative people further impacting their lives. The police do not have to say where that person is to anyone else, but just prove that the missing person is alive. Thankfully, since 1982, I believe that is exactly what they do to prevent these sorts of missteps. The fact is, family friends who are now quite elderly and unwell claim to have seen Lynette working at the Rock Castle Private Hospital 2 years after she vanished. During the trial that did conclude this year, 2022, for those of you who may be listening in the future, 3 nurses who were employed at Curl Hospital during that period came forward to say that they had never seen Lynette working there. During the trial, one of the witnesses was going to say that she knew Lynette and had never seen her working at Rock Castle, where she was allegedly where she had allegedly been seen working. Annoyingly, Chris's defense complained that the three witnesses should not be allowed to give evidence because it puts them at a forensic disadvantage due to the late stage that they had come forward. Sadly, the hospital is now South Pacific Private, a drug and alcohol rehabilitation center, and the staffing records from 1984 are no longer available. But looking back at the defense, Chris's lawyer argued that any leads about potential sightings, which could have proven claims that Lynette had abandoned her family, were ignored by police, and was quoted as saying, "We are saying that in this case there was a willful blindness, a deliberate failure to conduct any investigation in an impartial manner for a long period of time, and also claimed there was an intentional refusal to consider evidence that Lynette was alive and that there was a significant and very serious contravention of obligations of the police officers in this case." But what this dimwit seems to be forgetting here is that 1. Former Detective Sergeant Damien Loon previously made inquiries about Rockcastle Hospital in the late 90s, where it was concluded that Lynette had never worked there. And 2. Her children were her life. They were her rainbow babies, after many years of trying and failing to have any. Why would she leave them with their father, a proven predator that preyed on teenaged girls? She wouldn't have, and her family never believed she did either. I understand this lawyer wants to do the job they are paid to and cast a shadow on reasonable doubt. But I do wonder if between accusing Joanne of lying and Lynette of abandoning her family, whether or not they feel disgusting. In the year 2000, after Joanne had left Chris, in this investigation, police excavated part of the Bayview property where they uncovered a woman's pink cardigan that appeared to have been slashed. However, forensic testing did not show a positive match for Lynette's DNA. It was during this that there was a theory that she had been buried under the pool. However, that part of the yard has not been excavated. Understandably so, as a new family now lives there. But I do wonder, wouldn't you as the homeowner want to know if you and your kids were swimming over a corpse? I mean, I know I would want to know. In February of 2001, the first coronial inquest was held regarding what may have happened, and it was during this that the Deputy State Coroner, Jan Stevenson, concluded that Lynette had been murdered and that her killer was someone she knew, and recommended charges be laid. The then Director of Public Prosecutions, Nicholas Cowdery, refused to do so because he said that there was not enough evidence. I guess I can understand. You would really want rock-solid evidence to prevent someone from slipping through the cracks of reasonable doubt. 2 years later, a second coronial inquest was held where coroner Carl Malenkovic recommended laying charges against Chris Dawson. But in August of that year, Nicholas Cowdery again refused to prosecute Chris Dawson, citing the same reasons as in 2001. And at this point, he has had 2 coroners hand him what all the available evidence had to say, and he still refused. It makes you wonder if he had a lack of self-esteem and didn't think he could do it, or if he was in the boys' club and was okay with what Chris stood for. I am hoping for the former, as a lack of confidence is easier to stomach than the latter. In 2015, the New South Wales Police Force Unsolved Homicide Unit reinvestigated the suspected murder, and in April of 2018, detectives requested the Office of the Director of the Public Prosecutions to review its brief of evidence. This led to the New South Wales Police digging up the property again, but did not find any trace of Lynette's body. But this did not slow things down, as in December of that year, Chris was arrested in Queensland to be charged in New South Wales of the death of his ex-wife Lynette. As the trial continued on, more evidence surfaced, strangely enough, from Lynette's mother, Helena Sims. Sadly, Helena passed away in 2001 without answers for what happened to her daughter. But she also kept extensive journals that shed light in a way I am sure she wasn't aware would provide such a deep insight. Pat, Lynette's sister, said Helena asked her to destroy the diaries before she died. While Pat kept them, she didn't read them, stating that maybe there was information that was important and that they should potentially go to the police. My goodness, was she right? These entries cast an honest light on Lynette's misery as Chris rejected her in favor of their teenaged babysitter, simply listed as JC, and would outline the misery she felt after her daughter's disappearance. I will now read through some of these entries for you. Tuesday, 6 October 1981. Over the Mona Vale to meet Chris and kids. JC there too. Lynn shopping. Chris comforting JC on bed in study. Wednesday, 7 October 1981. Lynn to work. JC to school with Chris. JC has problems and is Chris's shadow. Lynn home, very unhappy, almost in tears about Chris. I weed in the garden, etc. Home looks unloved. Towards the end of 1981, Chris tried multiple attempts to leave Lynette and move in with Joanne, and at one point made it almost as far as Queensland. He had packed all of his clothes and his pillow, leaving a note for Lynette that asked her not to paint too dark of a picture of him for the girls. However, Joanne allegedly became homesick over Christmas and they returned to Sydney. But Chris gave up Christmas with his family and also spent New Year's Eve with Joanne. Helena wrote a note to Lynette's older sister, saying, "Saddest Christmas I've had. Lynn wants Chris to see the doctor, I think, to see what's making him so angry with her." And that statement alone just makes me so sad. Lynette was under the impression that she was somehow doing something so wrong that her husband, the father of her children, was treating her just so horribly, which, if you are unaware, is a painful sign of abuse. No one deserves to be treated that way, and then to be so gaslit that they believe it's their fault. And from there, the journal entries from Helena continued. Thursday, the 31st of December, 1981. To Jenny and David's New Year party, home 2:30 a.m. Chris off on his own yacht party. Refused to take Lynn and two girls to see the yacht. Friday 28, 1982. Friday 8, January 1982. Rang Lynn, sounded half sozzled, said all was well. That was the last time Helena spoke to her 33-year-old daughter. It was from here that Chris started spinning his web of lies. As stated previously, he claimed to have dropped Lynette off at a Mona Vale bus stop, and shortly after she called him at the North Bridge Baths at about 3 p.m. to say she needed time away. The next journal entries are as follows. Sunday, 10 January 1982. Didn't sleep all night. Chris rang. Lynn rang him, not coming home. Lynn to ring me on Wednesday. Wednesday, 13th of January. Overcast. For swim, butte in water, rained. Lynn didn't phone as promised. Upset. Helena wrote a letter later that year to the police saying that Chris appeared visibly affected after the alleged phone call from Lynette. This was allegedly an STD call, which stands for subscriber trunk dialing. Effectively, it is a call that would be put through the switchboard and is now considered quite archaic. Helena even stated that she was unsure of what friends Lynette would have been staying with, as she wasn't sure of any living on the Central Coast. With this damning evidence, Judge Harrison said further calls Chris claimed to have received were lacking any content beyond the trite references regarding her absence. He then continued to say it was simply absurd that if marital problems had caused Lynette to abandon her home, Chris would have been the only person that she called. And as a divorcee, I can attest to that fact. When you are leaving a toxic situation, you do not wish to speak to the other person that was involved. Not unless you really have to. The judge even described Helena's contribution to the trial as somewhat extraordinarily documented in her writings, providing what might be characterized as a real-time commentary on the events as she perceived them at the time. Lynette's brother, Greg Sims, said that it had never made sense to the family at all, and had been quoted as saying, "We've always said that she wouldn't have left those two children, and the first person she would have contacted would have been my mother. There is no bones about that at all. It would have been Mum first, if she was in trouble. Mum would have said, 'Come home, come to Clovelly.'" And I hear that. I know there are those out there without that connection, but if you do have even a remotely decent connection to your mother, you know, at the end of the day, if the world is ending, you can call your mother and they will be right there. On the 30th of August 2022, Chris was found guilty of murder, with Justice Harrison saying, "I am left in no doubt. I am satisfied beyond reasonable doubt that the only rational inference is that Lynette Dawson died on or about the 8th of January 1982 as a result of a conscious or voluntary act committed by Christopher Dawson." Now, as this case has only just had its verdict, there is no sentence for Chris as of yet. However, the decrepit old ballsack has been told by his new lawyer that he will not be proceeding to apply for bail, as it is highly likely that it will be denied. But he is afraid, due to the death threats that he has received from other inmates. And to that I say good. He is 74 years old. His sentence will likely result in him dying in prison regardless of if another inmate does anything to him. But he can die scared, likely how Lynette did. And on that salty note, that is all I have for you this week. I will be posting relevant pictures on Facebook and Instagram at What You Should Know Australia. Keep up to date by following me on Twitter at WhiskerPod. That is WYSKAPOD. And if you want to reach out, please do so by sending an email to whatyoushouldknowaustralia@gmail.com. Until next week, my lovelies, stay safe and stay hydrated. Bye!